This chart visualizes an estimated $45 trillion. That is the amount of wealth the British extracted from India over their 200-year rule. Conquering the Indian subcontinent was long considered an impossible task. It was known as the Golden Bird. Even Alexander the Great had to turn his armies back, and for centuries, the mighty Mughal Empire held absolute control over this incredibly wealthy region. So it defies all logic that the group to eventually break that empire was formed in December 1600 by just 25 London merchants. The East India Company was a tiny joint stock startup that actually failed its initial attempt to trade in Indonesia and had to flee. But by the early months of 1857, British officials across India were in a panic. Under the cover of darkness, anonymous messengers were passing stacks of unmarked flatbreads, chapatis, from village to village. The British had no idea who was sending them or what they meant, but they were terrified. Those chapatis were a sign that the entire country was about to explode. This is the story of how a failed corporate startup used a specific, deadly playbook to buy, subvert, and eventually conquer the most heavily armed subcontinent on Earth. When the East India Company first arrived in Gujarat in 1608, they had absolutely no leverage. Their representative, William Hawkins, traveled to Agra to ask Emperor Jangkir for trading rights and was flatly rejected. The Portuguese already controlled the local trade and paid heavy taxes to the Mughal court. Facing extinction, the company realized they needed to demonstrate their value to the emperor. In 1612, they attacked and won a small naval skirmish against the Portuguese at a village called Swali. This calculated display of force caught the attention of the Mughal court. Capitalizing on that momentum, the English king sent a diplomat named Thomas Roe to the court. Roe was clever. He spoke to Jahangir in Farsi and brought European technology like mechanical watches and telescopes as gifts. He promised heavy tax revenues in exchange for a permanent trading post in Surat. During this first phase, the company relied on corporate groveling and diplomatic persistence. They were effectively guests of the empire, fully aware that a single decree from the emperor could dissolve their business instantly. By 1670, their profits were soaring, and King Charles II granted the company massive new legal rights. They could now claim territory, mint their own money, and form a private army. This new power led to a catastrophic miscalculation by the company's new director, Josiah Child. When a local Mughal governor in Bengal raised trade taxes, Child refused to pay. In 1686, he attempted to treat the company like a sovereign state and declared war on the Mughals. The response was absolute destruction. Emperor Aurangzeb's forces easily crushed the British soldiers, demolished their factories, and kicked them out of Bengal. Josiah Child was forced to literally get on his knees, beg the emperor for forgiveness, and pay a massive fine just to resume trading. This humiliation taught the company a direct frontal assault on a unified central power was suicidal. For the next 20 years, they reverted to their role as submissive merchants, carefully rebuilding their wealth and waiting for the empire to show signs of internal rot. In 1707, Aurangzeb died, and the unified Mughal territory cracked into dozens of smaller kingdoms ruled by Nawabs and Marathas. Observing these rivalries, the company waited to weaponize its wealth, focusing on the wealthy region of Bengal to install a puppet ruler. In 1757, the company faced the Nawab of Bengal at the Battle of Plassey. Robert Clive secured a victory by bribing the Nawab's own top general, Mir Jafar. The general agreed to keep his troops off the battlefield in exchange for the company making him the new puppet ruler. The climax of this strategy came in 1764 at the Battle of Buxar, where the company defeated a coalition of Indian rulers. The resulting Treaty of Allahabad granted the East India Company the legal right to collect taxes directly from the citizens of Bengal. With the stroke of a pen, the East India Company had weaponized India's internal divisions. They successfully used their massive cash reserves to buy the loyalty of the elite, transforming a private trading corporation into a sovereign, tax-collecting government. By the 1840s, the company was using every legal loophole imaginable to extract wealth. They introduced the Doctrine of Lapse, a policy stating that any Indian kingdom without a biological male heir would automatically become the property of the company. At the same time, their relentless taxation forced farmers to pay massive fees just to grow crops on their own land. The agricultural economy collapsed, turning millions of farmers into destitute tenants and sparking widespread, devastating famines. The breaking point arrived in 1857 among the Indian soldiers employed by the company. A rumor spread through the barracks that the paper cartridges for their new rifles were greased with cow and pig fat, deeply offensive to both Hindu and Muslim troops who had to bite the cartridges to load them. A soldier named Mughal Empire fired on his British officers, sparking a massive mutiny. What started as a labor dispute within a corporate army quickly spread to the civilian population, evolving into the First War of Independence. The East India Company squeezed the population for every possible penny until the pressure became unbearable. Absolute corporate tyranny had created the exact conditions for its own violent destruction. The British response was swift and merciless. They spent a year violently suppressing the revolt, executing rebel leaders, and exiling the very last Mughal emperor to completely erase any alternative power structure. Back in London, the British government looked at the chaos and made a definitive ruling. Allowing a private company to govern an entire subcontinent and maintain its own standing army had proven to be a liability. They passed the Government of India Act of 1858. This legislation stripped the East India Company of all its authority and transferred all territory, assets, and military forces directly to Queen Victoria. The era of corporate rule was over, but the structural extraction of wealth continued. The East India Company was dissolved, and its massive holdings were absorbed into the formal, state-controlled system of the British Raj.